So before we really get into how to program, let's take a look at what programming looks like. Programming can look many different ways depending on the environment you're programming in and the language that you're programming in. Now, that being said, there are a lot of languages that use a lot of the same structures, and there are a lot of languages that are based off of similar original languages, similar older languages. So there are some languages that look very much the same as well. Over the next few pages in here, I have some different examples of how to write Hello World in different programming languages. Some of them will look very similar, some of them not so much. So the first language here, Ada, which was actually named after Ada Lovelace, was funded by the U.S. Department of Defense in the late 70s to early 80s. You can see here to write Hello World takes, 5 lines of code. Below that we have C. C is one of the most well-known, one of the most successful, one of the most widely used programming languages. It was developed by Dennis Ritchie in the late 60s to early 70s at AT&T Bell Labs. You can see here, pretty short, pretty simple, print F, and then hello world inside of parentheses and quotation marks. All of that is inside of curly braces. And of course, we see both Ada and C use a semicolon on the end of their lines. On the next page, JavaScript, which we'll be working in shortly. It was originally developed with Netscape in 1995. It was developed under several other names until its final renaming to JavaScript, which was released with Netscape version 2.0 B3. Netscape used to be a household name. Nowadays, a lot of kids don't have a clue what it is, but it was one of the first internet browsers that really was widely used, widely known about, and really brought the internet to millions of people early on in the history of the web. Here we have a simple hello world, console.log, hello world inside of single quotes, which is inside of a set of parentheses, and once again ending on a semicolon. There are a couple other ways that we could do that, and we'll talk about that later. And then we have Swift, which was developed by Chris Latner with Apple in 2014. Pretty new. It was designed specifically to work with pre-existing frameworks and code used for Apple mobile and desktop platforms. So it's your language for making apps, both for your iPhone, iPad, as well as your desktop type machines, like a MacBook or a iMac. And in Swift, we have print, ln for like line, and hello world inside of quotation marks, and inside of parentheses, notice no semicolon. So over time, programming has changed. Programming languages are living, functional tools that we use to control and manipulate our computers. As such, as time progresses, what we need computers to do changes, and in response to that, the way that we program also changes. This can result in new languages, but can also result in new versions or practices in pre-existing languages. For example, Swift being, just produced in 2014 versus languages like JavaScript being around since 1995 now, or C being, significantly older. Fortran, which didn't show an example in the previous batch, is one of the longest used languages and has some variance as the language has changed over time. In addition, it could be utilized with decks of punched cards, so a little similar to Charles and the original computer. Below here is actually an example of a Fortran punch card with the program actually Hello World written on it. There were written versions of Fortran as well. You didn't always have to use punch cards. So we can see 3 different versions of Fortran here: Fortran 66, or Fortran 4, Fortran 77, and Fortran 90. In addition, Not all programming is code. While the previous examples were all written code, with exception to the punch card, there are other environments. Scratch is pretty well known, and there's the newer Blockly. They're both popular visual programming environments used in education. The visual programming environment LabVIEW is commonly used and well known in engineering fields. So even though we tend to think of this sort of format here for education, it is used for serious business as well. Computing and programming are both expanding at a rapid rate, and companies are having increased difficulty finding applicants. Companies aren't only interested in trying to interest current potential employees, but are already aiming at the next generation as well. Companies are backing organizations that offer free programs to learn and understand programming, even for children who don't yet read. Here's an example of code.org with a cute little bumblebee. On the top right, we have Lightbot, which originally was actually created by a high school student, but he's now working on making more educational type products. On the bottom right is a screenshot from a game called Roblox, which allows you to not only play sort of a game, but actually learn a little bit of programming to make modifications to it, and the things you can do with it are actually quite sophisticated and quite complex as you get further into the understanding of how it all works.